The question that is the title of this video is a bit misleading today because, in my opinion, this Burenia track is the diamond in the rough of the Metroid Dread soundtrack. But before we get into all of that, I have a couple of important things to mention. First of all, there is officially a SoundCloud up with the tracks from this series available, as well as some of my other remixes from the channel. So for those that have been looking for a way to stream and listen to these, I'll put a link in the description as well as in the comments. And Spotify will be coming in the future as well, but I'd like to finish the series first before that happens. Also, there's been a bunch of you that have brought up modding the game with these, which I'm very humbled by that proposition. I did not really have that in mind when I set out to do this, so I think there would be a lot of work to do with these tracks to have them ready to coincide with gameplay, like in terms of looping and things like that. So I really have no experience in what any of that looks like. If you have commented that or you have experience in modding, do me a favor and hit me up on my email, because I would love to just start thinking about that and talk with you about what that would involve and what that looks like. And you can find my email on the About section of my channel page. This channel is only about 2 months old now, and the amount of attention that this series has gotten is pretty surprising and starting to feel a little daunting to know that by nature this results in all of you comparing my composing to the likes of Kenji Yamamoto and the composers that worked on Metroid Dread. When I had the idea for this series, my intention was pretty much just, hey, I have some ideas of like what I would have done with the soundtrack, and so hey, let's actually create it. So ultimately this is really just meant to be a fun creative exercise. So I know that I'm inevitably opening the door to criticism by doing this, but I fully realize that, you know, we all have different preferences for music, and so I welcome that, and hopefully you'll see my composing and arranging grow through this process, and I hope that you stick around to see that. Speaking of which, as I'm writing this, I have 800 of you subscribed, and I wanted to say personally how grateful I am that so many of you have gotten enjoyment from these videos. It would be pretty amazing if we could hit 1,000 from this video, so if you're enjoying this content and you want to continue supporting this project and other videos like this, I'd just be really humbled if you would subscribe to the channel. So with all that said, let's take a look at this original Burenia track. As I stated in the intro, this track sort of breaks the mold of what the premise of this series is, and it's my favorite in the game. I've talked about how I've loved in previous Metroid games that balance between ambient and melodic, and this is an example of that being done very well in my opinion. Without even getting into anything theory related, I think anyone can listen to this and just feel what this area is like through the music. And to me, that's the goal of a video game score, and that's what I found missing from the rest of the game. It's that clear emotive direction that complements the area and gives the player a sense of emotion that relates to what they're seeing on screen. In the case of Burenia, I think this is accomplished not by just the notes and harmonies, but by the texture and atmospheric elements being used. If you listen closely, underneath the melodic stuff, you're going to hear this canvas of underwater sounds and ambience that gives a backdrop to everything else. There's a pretty heavy delay on all the instruments, which is that echo-like effect that sounds like you're hearing it kind of move away from you, and in combination with the reverb on the track, that's what to me makes it feel like everything is sort of swimming around you and almost moving slowly like we are underwater. It's pretty hard to know for sure, but I really think if you played this to me without knowing the game or what type of area that it's for, I would immediately guess something like what we have in Burenia. In terms of harmony, we spend a lot of time on this track in Dorian mode, which also plays a part in the ambience that you feel in this track. A Dorian scale is one that's close to a natural minor one, but instead of a flatted sixth, it's raised 1/2 step to a natural sixth. Some other examples of Dorian mode being used you might be familiar with are Mad World by Tears for Fears, Scarborough Fair by Simon and Garfunkel, and this one, which is the first thing that I always think of when I think of Dorian, which is the American Beauty theme by Thomas Newman. Even though all these tracks are very different from each other in lots of ways, there's still like this sense that they're coming from the same universe or the same world. That's what that Dorian mode is doing. You might experience it differently than I do, but when I listen to music in Dorian, I have this deep sense of melancholy and nostalgia, it kind of makes me want to sort of sit back and reflect on my life in a way. It's that raised sixth and by effect the major 4 chord that gives all of these pieces that unique Dorian sound. I brought up that in the case of Dairon's original track, which uses a whole tone scale, that I felt it relied a little too heavily on that modal sound, and it felt a little too jarring at times. And I think the opposite is actually true for Burenia. The moments I do lose a little bit of interest in this original track is when it moves away from its Dorian center. My attempt in reimagining this track took me much longer than the previous 3, mostly because it was much more difficult to find my own voice in it and what I actually thought that I could really improve. But that's the basic idea that I took and ran with, which is trying to create a little bit of a more consistent atmosphere through the harmony and chords being used. At the same time, this one is going to stick a lot closer to the original score than in previous videos, simply because I didn't think it was necessary to start from scratch based on how effective I thought this one already was. I've seen comments not on just my videos, but on a lot of Metroid compositions that say they feel there's too much reliance on the Prime series ideas, which I think can be a bit of a lazy take because, one, the Prime games are, just like every game in the series, a part of Metroid's musical backdrop now, and a big one at that. So when making remixes or something like this, I actually think it's important to be aware of the musical vernacular of whatever it is that you're creating, so that as you're wanting to create something new and fresh, there's also still a familiarity that's cohesive with the existing context of the series. And with that being said, with this track, I intentionally referenced the Prime games in a few subtle ways, as I felt that this was a good opportunity to bring that cohesion to Dread and give you the sense that, yes, this is a new planet and a new adventure, but this is still Samus's adventure, and we're still in the Metroid universe. So with all that said, here's my reimagined version of the soundtrack for Burenia.